Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Well, welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Glad to have you here. I love when you guys reach out. I've gotten so many emails lately asking for a copy of Dental Wealth. Tell me you're loving the podcast, and I love that feedback. So, don't hesitate to reach out and let us know, or you've some questions or something you want me to talk about in the podcast. I'll be more than happy to do that. I want to also give some reference today. When I do this podcast, you'll find that I'm talking about different subjects. And the reason I do that is because, wealth encompasses so much more than just money. I think what happens is we go, I thought he was just going to talk about money. Wealth has to do with relationships. It has to do with having time. It has to do with having systems and resources. And eventually, I'll be honest with you, I have a bias is that I want you all to be able to have a scalable organization. So if you're a dentist, listen to this. I want you to have a scalable organization that's growing, and you have systems in place and teams in place, and that you have the time and ability to do the things you want. And I've talked about that again, before, which is why you don't want to sell your dental practice, right? You want to hold on to it. And, if you read through Dental Wealth and you listen to anything that I talk about, it's this idea that, it makes a lot more financial sense to keep your dental practice. But the reason people sell them is because they start to get stressed out and tired. And there's a lot of people out in the marketplace that are vying for your business. They want to buy your business. And someone told you once upon a time that $1 million is a lot of money, and it's just not. It equals about $4,000 a month, which is not that much money. So we look at this and say, okay, if I want a scalable business, if I want to have a scalable business, then today what I want to talk about is this idea of, what do I have to do? One of the things, and I have this amazing, I'd say I'm lucky. And I'm lucky because I've got to spend so much time with so many doctors and literally thousands. And so I start to see things and patterns like we all do. And you see this from a dental side too. And we start seeing these patterns emerge. And then when patterns start to merge, it's in a sense, what we're doing is creating almost like statistical profiling in our heads, right? Because we can kind of predict things. And so one of the things I see often is people getting stuck on strategic innovation within their business because they get stuck on the same voices. What I mean by that is it's the same conversations with the same people, their same dental friends, right? So they go to think about doing a change in their business. And then they go back and they ask this same group of friends who have a similar business to them what they're struggling with, and they get a pretty predictable answer. And they start to kind of do things the same way over time. And so what I'm talking about today is this idea of strategic innovation within our business. And when we start thinking about this idea is that, how do we grow a business? And I'm not talking about technically systems, but everybody should have a team of individuals that, if you're a dental practice listening to this, I hope you have an executive team, a leadership team, or a group of individuals you can sit down with. But I want you to write this down as you're listening to this. So don't just watch it. I want you to write this down. One of the things that you need, by the way, is strategic. I need you to think about these new questions strategically you could implant into your business. So I'm going to ask you a question, which is, what are some new questions? What are new questions that you could be asking about your business that you've never asked before? Now, you might get stuck. And if you get stuck, that's a great time to say, I need what would be the next thing, which is I need new voices. I need somebody else to be maybe weighing in on my business who isn't in the exact same business or isn't in the exact same paradigm. For instance, our own business, I was talking about Tower Leadership recently, and I said, I was talking about having somebody weigh in on a decision that was nowhere near our industry. And the reason why is they have a completely different perspective. We're all up against a wall, so to speak, and we can only see things from a certain perspective. And so when we look at our business, we need somebody to bring in new voices and new questions. But we need to do this for our lives too, right? So in your life, if you actually start thinking about it, what are new questions you could be asking about your own life that you haven't asked before? So like if you're doing this exercise, I would love for you to draw like a T-shaped grid and then write on one side new questions, right? And then, write personal and then professional. And then what are the new questions? And so what we would do is say, personally, what are new questions? What if I was to add this to my life? What if I was to take away this from my life? What would make me feel accomplished professionally, right? Maybe they're just new questions in a different way that you've never asked them before. In your business, what if you had a new product, new service? Is there any way to be more efficient? What if I was to insource this? What if I was to outsource that? What if I had somebody else strategically looking at my business? And so I want you to think about this. If I take someone who's non-dental, so let's just take somebody who has a $30 million business and they sit down with you, now they're on your board, and they sit down and they looked at your financial operation. They looked at your KPIs and they looked at your marketing and they looked at literally your executive team, your leadership team, decision-making, how you get things done, processes. Do you think they'd have some feedback for you? Are you getting new feedback? Are you looking at your business? Because when we start looking at organizations that grow and scale, okay, even, I start to see these DSO conferences pop up. And that's great, from some perspective. I think it's great to, some of the advantage of being in the DSO mindset is that, and by the way, I believe in preserving independent dentistry. Let me make sure I make that clear. And this is to serve independent dentistry, but we don't want to ever close our eyes either. So if we think about this idea, let's just say you were spending time at a DSO conference, those might be new voices. And so you start thinking, man, I never thought about having, this or that, or so it might open your mind. But I would take that to even further, because even these DSOs, the vast majority of them in the grand scheme of business are very small. And so even at a DSO conference, people might be getting excited because they're getting all this DSO mindset. But then the problem is, once again, they're sitting around with the same voices, the same ideas, the same circle. So here's a question for you now. How could you add new voices to your business? I want you to write that down. And if you're going to listen to this, write it down. That's the whole point. Take a few minutes and write this down, because I want to see you be tremendously successful. And I will tell you, when I told you I had a big sample size, the most successful people, when they listen to something like this, they implement it. And they figure out ways they can put it in their life. And by the way, they listen to a lot of things like this. And so here's a question. What voice could you bring into your personal and professional life? What if you had someone just analyze your personal life for a moment? Let's just stop there. If I hung out, by the way, you wouldn't want to hang out with me for a week because I would have you doing all kinds of things you've never done before. And they might be painful in some ways, but think about this. If I spent time with you, I would make you, literally, if you hung out with me for a week, you would grow tremendously personally and professionally. And I'm not saying that in an arrogant way. I'm just saying because my habits are pretty intense. This morning I woke up at, I want to say 4:15 just to spend 2 hours just on vision and goal setting. How many people are waking up spending 2 hours just to do vision and goal setting? And so I'm willing to do things that other people won't. And that might be a new perspective, by the way. This might be your new voice or one of your new voices. Most people don't know where they're going. And even though I do, I spend additional time carved out of my morning just to make sure that I'm really intentional on making sure my goal setting's happening. So if I was to look at your personal life, so if I was to be a personal coach for a minute and I looked at your life and gave you a new voice, and you don't even need me to do that because the vast majority listening to you already know what things you need to be doing anyhow. You're just not doing them. And so we need to figure out a way to do that. But it's the same thing for our business. When we start talking about wealth, and in this idea of wealth, we'd have to go back and look at this idea of saying, hey, I need some new voices in my business, and it can't just be me. If you think you're the only person who should be able to give a voice to your business, then you're not set up for success. That's why companies have boards. New perspectives, different ways to look at it. If the only advice you get is dental, one of the things I tell people all the time is I'm not a dental consultant. I'm not. I am a business consultant who spends time in the dental vertical. Now, the reason why it's so important, if I take the vast majority of dental consultants and I drop them into a manufacturing company and said, can you consult this company? They would wash out within an hour, right? It's not in their scope. Where you could drop me into a flooring company, you could drop me into a manufacturing company, you could drop me into it doesn't really matter, and I'd be fine. I would help that company. So that's a unique voice when you're listening to this podcast, because I'm going to give you a perspective from business and not from stuck inside of a mindset. Here's the question. How many voices do you have coming to you right now that are non-dental? And if you don't, you need some. Go spend time with people who have different perspectives on business. And so you need those perspectives, like new perspectives into the way you're looking at things. Because I promise you that if you start spending more time with people that have higher revenues and less dentists, and by the way, that's not a knock on dentistry or dentist. I married one. This is not a knock on dentistry. It's to say, if we're going to be phenomenal business owners at the cutting edge, this industry is changing dramatically, and we know that. We know the industry is changing. Now, there was a time when people still hung on to their typewriters, but we do know what happened. And this industry is changing. One of the things you need to do, if you're going to be on the forefront of this changes in this industry, you better get new voices. You better get new perspectives on the way you run your business, and you better ask better questions. And new questions. Don't keep asking the same question. Ask new questions. What questions have you never asked before? And if you could just take this podcast and write down, what questions have I never asked about my business before? And I would do that. What questions about my life have I never asked before? And if I looked at it that way, what perspective would I get? And the reason why I'm pushing you down this road of questioning as we create wealth is because, by the way, these are the questions that lead to innovation. Okay. When you get new perspectives, when you get new questions, a better set of questions, new voices coming in, what ends up happening to an organization is it pushes strategic innovation. What happens is strategic innovation happens because you get different eyes looking at a different way, asking different questions. And when that happens, then the mindset changes, and before you know it, you start implementing in a way that nobody else is implementing. You start doing things in a way that nobody else is doing. You start adding services or adding it in a way nobody else has done. Quit looking at what your competitors are doing. That's the biggest mistake. What if Steve Jobs, when he created the iPad, had looked at tablets that were in the marketplace? Do you guys remember what those looked like in 2006? They were garbage. What if he looked at that and said, that's what I want to compete against? How about the cell phone? What if he had looked at the cell phone and said, hey, let's just make a cell phone. And if he tried to compete against the cell phone, then he would have never created the iPhone, which was think about this now for a minute. When he created the iPhone, what did he do? New voices, new perspectives, new questions. And here's the thing. Do you understand that the vast majority of Apple sales now come from phones? A product that they didn't even offer. A product that they didn't even offer is now the vast majority of their sales. So when we start looking at strategic innovation and say, now here's a better question for you to think about. What would Apple have been had they never asked new voices and new questions from different perspectives? What would they have been today if the only thing they created was the MacBook? They wouldn't even be close to who they are today. The only reason they are who they are today is because they were willing to look at it from a different perspective. Now, does Apple want to be mainstream, middle of the market? What I mean by that is, do they want to be the average computer company, or do they want to be the greatest in the world? They want to be the best. They want to be on the forefront. They want to be innovators. The only way to do that is to get people from different walks of life coming into the organization, looking at different things and asking different perspectives, different questions. And I would do this from a personal side. I mean, this is a business, for all intents and purposes, this is a business podcast. But if you don't understand that your life is part of this too, then you're missing the whole point. A business is just an asset helping us to obtain the life we want so that we can impact others, and including ourselves. And so if you're not bringing new perspectives into your life, if you're not bringing people around you, right? If your whole group on Friday night is doing nothing more than figuring out the quickest way to get to the bar, then that might not be the best group to get you to the next place you're trying to get to in your life. And I would look at that and say, do I need different voices in my life? Maybe people who are on Friday night working on how to put capital groups together, right? Or something more advanced. Maybe it's just getting ready for Sunday, or praying, or talking about being successful, or starting a new company, or whatever it ends up being. Maybe we need new voices in our lives. Maybe we all do, right? Are we hanging out with the same tired voices that we've been putting up with for the last 10 years? The reason why people say that your net worth is the 10 people, that you spend the most time with, that it's kind of an average of the people that you spend the most time with, is because you're listening to the same darn voices over and over and over and over and again. And that's the group that you go back and ask for help with. Great companies are strategic companies. Write that down. Like, great companies are strategic companies. And part of being strategic is not thinking you have all the answers. Part of being strategic is getting outside advice, sometimes outside of your industry. It's why if you look at board of directors for C companies, these large corporations, they come from different walks of life. They're not all in the same industry. Interestingly enough, when I'm a Navy guy, and the commander of the aircraft carrier was what they call a surface warfare. Well, one of them had to be a surface warfare. And then you had the admiral who had to be, one of them had to be surface and one of them had to be air. They couldn't be the same designation, which means one of them had to specialize in maneuvering ships and the other had to be specializing in aviation. And that's powerful to think about for a second, by the way, because why would the Navy want two different perspectives? Because when they're going into battle, they need people with different perspectives to be looking at the battle situation. They don't want people looking at it from the same angle. They want two people to sit in a room with different questions, with different voices from different perspectives at the same situation so they can go into battle and they don't miss. Does your organization miss? Are you missing something? How much is that something costing you? Both in your personal life and your professional life. I'm going to leave you with that. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys enjoy. Listen, I'm committed to your success. I'm committed to seeing what you guys can do and be involved. Like I said, the amount of people that are submitting, questions is overwhelming. It's awesome. And thank you so much for doing that. The amount of subscribers and listeners and people that are chiming in, it's great. That means the content is resonating true with you guys. And I love to hear that. Make sure you're hitting subscribe. It's so easy talking about new perspectives. Look, you just simply hit a button that says subscribe and you get notified of when this pops out. So do that. It takes a second. But make sure, because I'm not always going to come from the same perspective. I don't want to be a one-trick pony. I don't want to sit here and just talk about math all the time. I don't want to just talk about from one angle, because you guys need to understand, to become a great business owner, you can't just look at it from one perspective. I'm going to give you a whole bunch. And that's what creates dental wealth. Thanks for listening.